Hello everyone, Mr. E here, and if you look at your calendar, you might have realized it's already September, which means that we are 3 months away, if everything goes in a similar pacing as it did last year, only 3 months away from having 2 more mainline updates released for Darktide for the year, and I would have to hope to the Emperor above that one of those updates has a class rework in it, because we have 3 classes left that still desperately need these reworks, who need to be modernized, who need to be brought up to snuff with the Ogre and the Arbites, who are the gold standards for what a talent tree, for what build variety and diversity should look like. And so today is going to be the first in a series of 3 videos I'll be doing, looking at each of the remaining 3 classes, the Zealot, the Veteran, and the Psyker, if you're unaware, and addressing the pain points, the issues why they need these reworks so badly. Now, if you are a Veteran or Psyker stan, I totally understand why you would choose those as the primary one to should get the rework first and foremost, but I'm going to be picking the Zealot. So I'm starting with the Zealot today because the Zealot would be my pick. If I could only have one of them reworked, I would absolutely go for my boy the Zealot. Just for full disclosure, he's been my main since the beginning of Darktide, and so it's one part self-serving, but also I think he is perfectly situated for a rework to do a lot of good because his talent tree is by far the most antiquated. This talent tree that you can see in front of you has received almost no changes since the talent trees were released back in patch 13, which by my calculations was almost 2 whole years ago. The Psyker, by comparison, has had several talents added and a whole web of interconnectivity added to his tree. When you look at the Psyker's talent tree, it is so much more interconnected and therefore similar to the way that the Ogren and Arbites are structured in a more modern style. The Veteran, his was created the most recently because he was actually the last in line to be created when they were creating the original talent trees. In fact, if you remember, he actually launched without keystones and they added those after the fact. So his reflects a learning process whenever they were creating these talent trees, and I would have to guess that the Zealot, from the way it looks and the way it builds, was probably among the first talent trees that they created back when they were making these things. And that means that the fact that he hasn't received any changes over all these years, really like a couple of changes, such as like these little nodes right here and the way the Invocation of Death works, but outside of that, his structure, the talents that are in here, all of that has stayed exactly the same, and it is just beyond stale at this point. Basically, what I'm saying is the Zealot has only ever had tweaks to his numbers in his tree, more or less. And there actually is another number that I'm interested in tweaking, which is my subscriber count. If you have not yet, and you like Darktide, and you like analytical content, and you like the sound of my voice, subscribe. Help me reach Warhammer 40k subscribers before the end of the year, and we will all be better for it. Hopefully I can continue to cover this, and hopefully we can see a rework that I'll be able to break down for you in the months to come. Now, let's really dig into it. As I said, he has only got number tweaks, but that's not to say he is not a powerful class. And this is where I think a lot of people are going to fight me on this. You're going to say there's other classes who are more worthy of the rework because Mr. E, you ranked Zealot right in the middle of the pack, behind Ogre and Arbites in terms of power, but ahead of Psyker and Veteran. What's the deal? Why wouldn't you rework one of the lobies on the totem pole? Well, being powerful isn't the be-all end-all. There needs to be fun in being powerful, and the Zealot is probably the least fun class to play for how powerful he is. Compare that to the Ogren and the Arbites, who are both incredibly powerful, but they're also a ton of fun to play, and they have a good amount of diversity to their builds and ways you can be powerful with them. The Zealot, by comparison, is really, really solved in terms of how he gets the power, and it devolves into making the same choices almost every time. I've tried to drill this point home in a number of videos about him, and I still see players who are struggling to make those optimal choices, but once you do, once you figure out what the right choices are on Zealot, you won't look back, because there are just some that are like heads and shoulders above the rest. So let's go over the 4 reasons that I've been able to nail down here that he needs this rework, and these are reasons that are making this talent tree super stale, and therefore his builds and playstyles super stale. If you have any more reasons that I don't hit here, leave me in the comments and let me think over those, because I was racking my brain, but there's definitely something wrong here. The first reason that I have ascertained is that he requires a lot of commitment to reach build-defining nodes. By that, I mean specifically our Blitz abilities and our Aura abilities. Blitzes and Auras on the more modern classes, such as the Ogre and the Arbites, they are nearly build independent. The blitzes specifically on both of those classes are completely independent of what you choose leading up to the point. You can choose any blitz with no additional point tax at all. And the auras are only very slightly locked to your talents. You have to spend maybe one extra talent point to cross the tree and reach a different aura if you really, really desire that. But the Zealot is hard locked into choosing a path and getting one of his blitz abilities. So if you wanted to choose Blades of Faith, you would have to choose 1, 2, 3, 4 points in order to get Blades of Faith. That's not really that bad because Blades of Faith is the best blitz, and a lot of these nodes right here, as we'll talk about in a second, are the best nodes that the Zealot has. But what if you wanted to use Stunstorm Grenade, which is a very powerful and very useful grenade? Well, then you have to take 1, 2, 3, 4 points that are terrible, that really aren't good at all compared to the ones over here. You're going to lose a lot of player power in order to get this blitz ability. Wouldn't it be nice if you could choose these blitz abilities independent of that? The same thing goes for these auras down here. You're having to commit 1, 2, 3, 4 points in order to get to that aura, and that really, really sucks because these auras are not all created equally. You wouldn't want Beacon of Purity in all builds. You'd probably do want Benediction in all builds, and Loner is next to useless, so probably just needs a rework on its own. The second issue that I find Zealot builds running into are he's got these groupings. He's got these clusters of some of the most powerful talents on the entire tree. Right here is a great example. I call this area right here the trifecta. We have Scourge, which gives melee critical hits the chance to apply bleed. When you hit with a critical hit, you apply a stack of bleed, and it causes stacking damage over time. And when you hit an enemy who is bleeding already, you can stack up to 30% extra crit chance. So this is going to feed off of itself. This is one of the strongest talents for stacking extra crit and for making enemies bleed and take a ton of extra damage and getting more crits on them. So an incredibly powerful talent, a guaranteed pick on pretty much every single Zealot build. Then we've got Second Wind down here, which is an amazingly absurd defensive talent. It is one of the best defensive talents in the entire game because you don't have to do anything to get this toughness back. You just have to avoid an attack. Whereas other characters choose between taking the damage or avoiding the damage, we can choose between taking the damage or gaining health back or gaining toughness back by dodging properly, which is crazy. And then Enduring Faith synergizes perfectly with Scourge because when you get a crit here, we get 50% toughness damage reduction, which is an amount of toughness damage reduction that rivals what the Ogren has on like 3 different talents combined. This thing makes the Zealot absurdly tanky. And so all 3 of these talents are all together in a nice little cluster, and they are right over Blades of Faith, which is probably the strongest blitz on the class. You know, a grenade that is independent of any resources. You get one every time you kill an elite or special in close range, and every time you pick up an ammo box. So just an absurd cluster of power, and that happens repeatedly throughout the tree, such as with Duelist and Until Death and Holy Revenant down here. And then we also have these very obvious choices right here with, not with Punishment, but with Faithful Frenzy and Sustained Assault being easy 1-point dips that almost every single Zealot build is going to choose, because this is just 20% additional melee damage. This is 10% melee attack speed, and they don't require any investment to get to. You're going to pick these. It's an absolute no-brainer, so why even have it really be a choice? And you might notice that there's not very many choices in this tree in general. The problem that makes this issue of having these groupings of stupidly powerful traits even worse is the opposite, and the third problem that I identified, which is that there are clusters of really poor talents, such as this road over here, Disdain, which gives you 5% damage up to 5 times on every other attack. And so you need to be hitting hordes, but you only get it on every other attack in a horde due to the way this doesn't carry over between attacks. Enemies Within, Enemies Without, which used to be one of the stronger defensive talents, now replenishes all of your toughness in 40 seconds while standing within at least range of at least 3 enemies in an era where you can regenerate your entire toughness bar in a matter of 2 or 3 seconds, especially on the Zealot. Why would you ever need this? Then we have Bleed for the Emperor. That's just useless. You know, we're not taking damage. And then 10% toughness on heavy attack kill pales in comparison to, I mean, Blood Redemption over here gives you 10% toughness on every kill, which is crazy if you really wanted to take that. But also we're just getting 15% toughness every time we dodge. So not that we have that issue on Zealot of keeping your toughness up, but this whole branch over here is really, really poor, as is this whole side of this middle branch. This side is okay. And then we've got some yucky talents here. We've got some yucky talents down here that you're really not going to choose unless you're going for like one really specific build. But the builds are so solved at this point. And by that I mean, like, yes, you'll see players who are inexperienced, who might have not played Zealot for more than like 10 hours or 15 hours and have never looked at a build guide or are not like thinking about what they're choosing. But as soon as they see someone playing with the good build on Zealot, they'll realize how much more survivable and damage dealy and killing potential comes out of a proper build that looks something like this, and they'll never look back. Because this is roughly the optimal way of setting up Zealot, and there's not a whole lot of deviation that can be done from this point. And the reason that deviation is so impossible to do is a combination of all the things we just talked about, such as the lots of points required to commit to get to certain places in the build, but also these minor nodes, which is my fourth and final issue I want to bring up, is the absolute saturation, the absolute state of this fucking tree that is 1/3 minor nodes in this build. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, extra bonus 1 right there for no fucking reason, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minor nodes in this 30-point tree. 1/3 of our nodes are going to, or of our points are going to just pointless little itty-bitty stat boosts that do not add any flavor or any diversification to the builds. They're literally just minor stat boosts, such as 5% melee damage, 25% suppression, 5% movement speed. Like, these things are nice in moderation, but let's compare this just off the top of our head to Ogryn. Ogryn builds, even ones that cross across the tree like this, have 6 minor nodes. And if you build straight down, like you went straight down the middle path more or less, you would take as little as 4 minor nodes. That's 6 more points you could be spending on actual things that help to define your build. Here we are spending so many of our points just to get to where we need to be. And this is another factor. I mean, not only do we have these clusters of points you pretty much have to take for the build to be like, you know, good, but then you have to waste a ton of points, including this one. I love this one right here. They couldn't think of an extra talent back when they were making these. They made these two and they're like, this we don't know. Just make it 5% movement speed because this part is too good already. But yeah, so they just get an extra minor node in there, squeeze it in. So yeah, we have a lot of issues here. I look at this talent tree and it looks to me like a rush job. There are a ton of nodes. I mean, look, unremitting, minus 20% sprint stamina cost. That is akin to something that you would roll as a perk on your weapon, right? That's not what a talent is in 2025 or nearly 2026. When we're looking at talents these days, I think that like Until Death is a much more appropriate talent. Duelist is these are powerful talents, but like, you know, these sort of things like Sustained Assault, this is sort of where the power level or the usefulness of talents exists. And the relative like power level of talents is on like something like the Arbites or the Ogryn, not 20% sprint stamina cost. If this were remade in a modern era, this would additionally have some other effect, such as you can't be CC'd while you're sprinting. I don't know, whatever it might be. One other thing, actually, let's go reason 4.5 that this class needs a rework. Do you see an issue right here? Just look right here. Yeah, you're not seeing that wrong. This gap right here is about 40 pixels wider than this gap right here. And this is the default tree, by the way. I don't know why this happens, because this is even. Like, look up here. This is completely even, and this is even. But when they came down here, they had this line come off of Loner and come in at an angle for some reason instead of going straight down. So this gets narrower right here for no reason at all. And it just makes this part like way smaller. I have no idea why this is like this. Like they made this line angle and this one straight. So very peculiar. I really hope if they would be so funny. What if they rework this class and that's the only thing they changed? That'd be really funny. Like, there's your rework, mystery. You're welcome. But yeah, that I noticed that when I was looking through this, and that really, really irked me. So yeah, you're not crazy if you've seen that before. So now that I've laid out the issues with this class and why I think it needs a rework, what would a rework actually look like for this guy? Well, I want to address it in vague terms, in generalistic terms, because going to nitty gritty and getting specific on this is just an exercise in futility, right? I can't force Fat Shark's hand. They might even already have this like most of the way to done, and they're waiting to push it out in December or something. So I'm not going to pretend to be psychic and know what's coming. But what it would need to do if I were in charge of designing this would be, first, we need to remove these minor nodes. Not all of them necessarily, but at least half of these need to go bye-bye, and we need to replace these with real talents. Now, replacing them with real talents is one part of the equation, but the other part is we need to be creating a talent web, because if you replace this node right here with an actual talent, well, I mean, you'd still just pick it up, guaranteed, when you're coming between here and here, so there wouldn't actually be a choice. This needs to be a talent web that creates deliberate decisions for the player to make, where they have to choose between, oh, do I want this one or do I want this one when I'm coming from one of these auras to one of these abilities. And that's going to require a complete redesign, tear down and redesign of this talent tree and an interconnected web. I mean, look at the Ogren and look at the Arbites. Let's actually go and like look at them right now, because I love the design of these classes. And let's actually look at the Ogren. The Ogren has one particular area in this tree that just makes me so excited every time I look at it. And it is a nice little interconnected web that has a ton of available options for you. Look at it right here. Right in here. The Arbites has a very similar thing set up as this, but there are so many ways. Like, your goal ultimately is you start here and you need to get to one of these three abilities. So you'll have to get to one of these 2 points in order to go to them. But you have so many ways of making it there, and all these options have their own use cases in different builds. And even though there are a few filler points there, it's not overpowering. Same thing applies down here. There's tons of different ways to play around with these points and path in very efficient and optimal ways to get different results. It's a very, very impressively and meticulously laid out tree, and I love it so, so much. So I'm really hoping for something like this. We would also need to, when we're talking about making this talent web, we also need to break up those OP talent clusters that I was talking about, where you have the trifecta of Scourge and Second Wind and all that stuff right next to each other. Those need to evaporate and be dispersed across the tree, especially talents that have ridiculous synergies, such as Scourge and the one that gives you the crit damage reduction on crit. Those two have no business being right next to each other because they have OP infinite synergy together, and obviously players are going to choose both of them. So it reduces the actual choice you'd make. What you should be doing when you're aligning these is make those both still be on the tree, sure, but make them locked behind some other points that might not be perfectly optimal to pick, or make them have to travel across the tree to get both of these together. If you want such a strong synergy as that, you should have to kind of path and build for it. Make some decisions, make some trade-offs in order to get that really OP synergy. And finally, he needs a rework on many of his talents. Like I said before, a lot of them are not providing any actual power, such as that, sprint stamina reduction. There's a ton more in the tree that I could get into, but yeah, there's a ton of duds in there that just are not providing any level of power, and a lot of them are just kind of useless on most, if not all, of the build designs that Zealot would ever employ in a modern setting. So those all need to get torn down and reworked and brought up in power level. I'm not asking for every talent to be an absolute S-tier banger bop like the Arbites has, where like literally 75% of his tree I ranked as an S tier or above talent. Like, he is absurd in that regard, but it would be a lot more fun and a lot more interesting, is what I will say, if they were in that range. But I'll accept A tier, even B tier, for moving these things up. And otherwise, if you don't do that, what you're going to have is players are just going to look at the current talent tree and say, well, those are the good talents. I'm just going to hunt across the whole talent tree and pick those back up, and there's my build, right? You need to be giving them viable options they might actually want to choose instead of the stuff that is currently OP. Give players a reason to make a build that doesn't include Until Death and Holy Revenant, for the guaranteed death prevention. If there was a way that you could, make that an actual choice, that players weren't just automatically going for that path because it is the strongest offensive node, as the strongest defensive node, as the strongest aura, you break that up and you make players make choices for it, and that would be an absolute banger as well. And as far as ults and keystones go, this is sort of where my recommendations end. I would like to see a change in how Chorus functions, just from a point of experience with the ability. It is a crazy powerful ability, but it is crazy boring. It really doesn't fit with the tempo of the game. Fury of the Faithful is very clearly by far the most fun and balanced ability. Just a simple charge ability that gets you in there, lands a really heavy hit on enemies, has a really short cooldown. It is very much reminiscent of the Ogryn's Indomitable Charge, which, as you might remember from the Ogryn rework earlier this year, did not receive almost any changes. Just a few baseline tweaks, but ultimately it ended up staying pretty close to the same with some additional quality of life buffs to it. But something like that doesn't need a whole lot of work to be modernized because it's really good as is. Something like Stealth, however, the Shroud Field ability for the Zealot, I'm not certain how I feel about its place in the game. I'm not certain how I feel about Stealth as a concept in Darktide. It really messes with the enemy's AI, and I'm not certain if the enemy's AI needs to be any less predictable than jerking all over the place and reassessing who it needs to be going for on a moment-to-moment basis because there's a character who's disappearing and reappearing every 3 seconds. So I wouldn't be totally dismayed to see Shroud Field reimagined as something else that can be more played with the team rather than played to your own selfish devices. But I'll leave that up to the people who design this game for a living. Keystones, of course, need to be reworked. I've complained about the keystones on the Zealot before, but the keystones on the Zealot are all variations on more melee attack speed and melee damage. They are all just steroid abilities. There's nothing that actually defines them. When we look at Ogryn keystones, right, you have one whole keystone down here in the center, Feel No Pain, that is solely devoted to damage reduction and like replenishing toughness and increasing, stagger. Then we have increasing your replenishment, and then we have Heavy Hitter over here that is all about damage and stagger and offensive potential, and then Burst Limiter Override on the other side that is all about ranged weapon utilization and extra crits and extra ammo efficiency. Very different strokes for different folks, and compare that to Zealot, which is like all just extra crit, extra damage, extra attack speed. Literally all of them fall into that category. I would love to see some more diversification there, because the more diversified you get in this regard, if you're making a different build, right, say you're running Ogrynheimer, you would choose Burst Limiter Override. Even though Heavy Hitter might be a more powerful pound for pound ability, like this keystone is absurdly powerful. It's one of the most powerful in the game, especially with its add-ons, but it doesn't fit perfectly. It's not the most powerful in this build. But when it comes down to Zealot and your choices are between A, B, and C, and A, B, and C all just increase your damage and your melee attack, well, you're just going to choose whichever one has the highest numbers. And it's not very hard to figure out in that case. So that's all I can offer for now, guys. I'm really, really hoping that this guy gets reworked by the end of the year, as I said, but we'll be talking about why the Veteran and the Psyker might also be in line for that as well. And hopefully this gives you insight. If you're a person who didn't see why Zealot should be getting that rework, now maybe you see a little bit more from my perspective as a mainline Zealot player. And if you did already agree with me, I hope this really resonated with you and you found yourself nodding your head and going, yes, yes. You're snapping your fingers like Leo at the screen the whole time. So if you have any other thoughts that I didn't mention, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll talk to you very soon about the Veteran's need for rework. All right, talk to you then. Bye-bye.